Hello, and welcome to Climate Fix Podcast. Here we dive into evidence-based solutions to climate change and various other pressing environmental issues. This podcast is created by Americans for Nuclear Energy, a pro-nuclear environmental organization. We take no money from industry or special interest groups. All donations are from individuals like you, interested in a grassroots scientific movement to solve the world's most pressing scientific problem, global climate change. We hope you approach these ideas with humanism and an open mind. Our mission statement is as follows. Nuclear energy is safe, cheap, plentiful, clean, and efficient. It has the capability to stop and reverse climate change while addressing the ever-growing demand for electricity globally. We strive to educate American citizens about this technology and to dispel misconceptions with facts. We firmly believe that both human civilization and industrialism can easily coexist with a healthy environment. Join us in helping to plan a prescription for a feverish planet, or as we like to say, a climate fix.
This is your host, Phil Ord.
And this is your co-host, Colby Kirk.
The name of this episode is Ecomodernism. Join the movement. We are excited to have our friend Gabriel Ignetti on the show to chat about the environmental school of thought called Ecomodernism and his new organization, Ecomodernist Society of North America. Ecomodernism is a philosophy that reconciles human development with a thriving natural world. It focuses on evidence-based technologies and policies that encourage decoupling mankind from the natural world, giving it room to rewild. One of the main ideas of ecomodernism is densification, meaning using land and resources as efficiently as possible with minimal encroachment on wild spaces. Thus, ecomodernists focus on and support things like nuclear power, GMOs, industrial agriculture, synthetic meat, material recycling, high-density housing, and desalination. Such technologies make humans less dependent on nature.
Here's a bit about Gabe. Gabe is a lifelong political activist, chair of the newly founded Ecomodernist Society of North America, and creator of the Ecomodernist Podcast. Gabe grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and is a retired public school teacher now living in Miami. He has served as vice president at large for the Central Labor Council of the U.S. Virgin Islands. His focus since retiring has been environmental issues, with a big passion for nuclear power. One of his biggest concerns is the looming climate crisis, and is currently on the board of 350.org South Florida.
I have been friends with Gabe for quite some time now, almost since the beginning of my journey as a pro-nuclear environmental activist in 2014. I helped him launch his first few episodes of his Ecomodernist podcast, which I urge listeners to check out, as he has some amazing guests. Gabe is one of the most passionate environmentalists I've ever met, and truly cares about the planet and its future inhabitants. He is also a tireless advocate for many noble progressive causes, and is not afraid to rustle feathers in his own circles. He is also a warrior of scientific truth and an ardent defender of inquiry and evidence.
That's awesome. He is a valuable voice in bringing skepticism to challenge the old ways of thinking within the traditional environmental movement. We need a lot more people talking about and advocating for this updated school of thought we call ecomodernism. I remember reading about ecomodernism when I was looking for a pro-science version of environmentalism, because so many dominant ideas in the environmental movement seem to go against the actual science and what is beneficial for both the people and the planet. GMOs and nuclear energy, to name a few. I'm glad we were able to meet with Gabe, who is spearheading the presence of ecomodernism in North America. We often hear from climate activists and environmental pundits that we are not doing enough for climate change, and that we need radical change in how we tackle the emissions problem. Ecomodernism, especially the support for nuclear power, brings radical change to the dominant narrative of environmentalism, which could actually yield achievable results.
Couldn't agree more. We are in desperate need of an evidence-based paradigm shift, and I think ecomodernism really tries to base itself on good science and data. This is why I, as someone who studied science in college, am so drawn to the philosophy. Also, the humanist nature of ecomodernism makes me feel less distressed and negative when it comes to human civilization and its effect on the environment. This is a great movement to which Gabe has dedicated his time.
For sure. All right, then. Here's our discussion with Gabriel Ignetti. Welcome, Gabe. Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on, guys.
For sure. Well, to start off, let's talk about what is ecomodernism?
Well, ecomodernism is best described as being a fusion of modernity and ecology. And it's not an artificial thing either, because they actually go together. And it is basically a philosophy that says that energy density and density of people as well is the best way to save nature. And of course, the most energy dense way of producing energy is nuclear power, as we know. And the most dense way for people to be together is in cities, in high-rise buildings, which is counter to the mainstream environmentalist trope, which says that like nuclear power is bad. And many environmentalists, they even take a hissy fit about tall buildings. And sometimes it's a good concern if you don't have any provisions made for mass transit. So I think that's a good qualifier. But I'd also like to say that ecomodernism is based on an ecomodernist manifesto, which a lot of people confuse, because when people see manifestos and read manifestos, it's like, this is how it is. So it was purposely used, that "and" was purposely used so as to make it open-ended. And to me, I see there's two ways of interpreting it. One is how you interpret modernity. I mean, do you interpret modernity as being the status quo, or do you interpret modernity as being a process to get us to a better future that can be very critical of the status quo? So I don't see, personally, ecomodernism to me as being a way of defending the status quo. It is a way to demand change. It is a way to connect with environmentalists, to me. And I've collaborated this with the European ecomodernists. I've been in touch with them. And they have the same, they are in demonstrations with, Extinction Rebellion. They were telling me, they've worked together. They worked with in the case of Finland, they worked with the Finnish Greens, who's actually, I don't think they're pro-nuclear, but they're not anti-nuclear. They're kind of an open tent, which is actually the way, the environmentalist movement should be,
Right.
But is not. So I see it as also an opportunity to build coalitions with other people in the sciences, because I know this is a podcast that's focused a lot on the climate and on nuclear power. But what's going on in nuclear is a part of a war on science that's gone back for centuries. And people fear modernity, always have. They fear change. But change is not something that will end. I mean, you can't go back into an idyllic past. You can't, just say, let's have degrowth and expect people to follow you, unless you're going to go with some kind of totalitarian state, which I don't even think people are even thinking of doing. I mean, these ideas in the environmental movement are just not well thought out, is basically what it is. And they're
for people, I was just going to say, let's just like bring out a definition here. So Wikipedia says ecomodernism is environmental policy which argues that humans should perfect nature and improve on human well-being by developing technologies that decouple human development from environmental impacts. They focus on things like, they're very technological in how to fix problems with things like nuclear power, precision agriculture, genetically modified foods, desalination, recycling, and dense urban living.
Yes.
And so it's densification that helps us avoid intruding too much on nature. So, and how would you say that is different from the mainstream environmental movement?
Well, the mainstream environmental movement goes back to the 60s, really. It was a time of great upheaval. It was the Vietnam War. And like before that happened, the people were trusting of institutions very much, overly so. But it went to the other extreme. So there was, a reaction against, centralized institutions. There was a back to nature movement, which was a rebellion against the technological state that people were living in. And what happened is that really kind of created the modern environmental movement in what it is today. And what they're caught up in is the appeal to nature fallacy, which is basically that whatever is natural is good and whatever is unnatural must be bad. So nuclear is bad, even though they don't realize it's very natural. Radiation is a very natural thing.
Yes.
That just slips completely by them. GMOs, unnatural. And you could go further than that, naturopathic medicine, opposition to big pharma, which it even goes beyond environmentalism. So it's that's pretty much and it's a problem.
So yeah, they've oftentimes devolved into equating skepticism of technology with environmentalism, which really kind of hinders our toolkit, really.
That tends to be a common problem because, when I try to communicate science with a lot of people, they'll often sort of frame a particular issue as being opposed to authority or being opposed to corruption. So it's not that they'll be naming nuclear technology, but they'll be thinking like, oh, you really trust a private corporation who's only interested in profit to safely run a nuclear plant? Like there's this sort of link that they have in their mind where we can't trust a technology because it's being used by some other institution that they deem is inherently corrupt. So that's certainly an obstacle to overcome.
Yes, I mean that's part of the romance with renewables is that it's decentralized. You own your own grid in your own home. That's part of it. That's part of it.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that I've certainly had with the environmental movement of today. And sort of, so like, what would you say is, some of the other specific issues that you might have with the current environmental movement and how ecomodernism provides a good alternative to that?
Well, I think I pretty much covered it, but I will say this, that it needs to be more than a philosophy. Ecomodernism needs to be more than something we just talk about. We need to be a movement. And that, by the way, is why I have set up just recently the Ecomodernist Society of North America, which is an activist organization. And by the way, there are ecomodernist societies in Europe. They're in Finland, and they're in several countries now. And they are forming a European ecomodernist society as well. And the thing is this, environmentalism the way it is now, it's like a microcosm of a lot of what goes on in politics. And
Mm-hmm.
the source of it is tribalism. I always say this. We have instincts. We are not completely rational creatures. Far from it. Few of us are. And even those people are, have to keep their emotions in check and try to be logical about things. It's not an easy thing to do. The thing about tribalism is this. It predates human nature. It goes back to the herd, the alpha male. When you go into the gorillas and chimpanzees, that's a necessity in the wild to survive. You have to follow the leader. You have to have groupthink. You have to, you can't be different. You can't think different. So that is important in the wild. And another thing that's important in the wild is that you can't think things completely through. You have to deal constantly in short-term thinking. And you have to have your fear levels is what protects you. In Neolithic times, if you're an animal in the jungle, if I'm going through the jungle or the forest or whatever, and I hear a lot of rustling in the bushes, I could think that, well, maybe it's a lion and maybe it isn't, but I have to assume the worst. My fear takes over. So we are very fear prone by nature. And science, on the other hand, is far more bold than that, though they are careful. And the thing is that our fears get the best of it when it comes to all of these things, and it takes over. And
Right.
we have an inordinate fear of things in reality. I mean, we think nothing about getting in a car and driving anywhere, and that's way worse than living in a near nuclear power plant. Even walking down the
Absolutely.
street safer.
So you would say maybe they've become a little bit more, a little bit too reactionary to things instead of
Yes.
critical thinkers.
There's
Yes.
evolutionary explanations for that too, because especially with the tribalism, because if you got exiled from your local tribe as hunter gatherer or something, that could be the equivalent of a death sentence.
Mm,
Yes.
And so there's that evolutionary baggage of having a really extreme wiring to be part of the group and to seek approval and belonging to the group. So that's something we have to contend with.
We do. And I'm going to tell you, there was an experiment that was done called the Ash experiment. I don't know if you guys ever heard of that. Solomon Ash, this is way back in, I think, in the 1960s or maybe the late 50s. But what he did was he took a group, he took a group of people and he paid them to be actors. And what he did was put up three sticks, and you could obviously, you could see, I mean, it's not three sticks that you look at, it's on paper, you know?
I
And
know this one.
obviously, yeah, obviously one stick was obviously taller than the other. So you got to say which the tallest is. And so they put one person who was unsuspected in a group of, I think, 9 other people, and everybody was picking the wrong stick. And 50% of the time, they just went right along with it. And it's been high as 75% of the time. And the thing is this, though, when and they did compare it, they had the people look at the sticks and check, and they even made sure that there was nobody around. People would get it 100%. So it wasn't even hard at all.
Yeah.
But a little variation on the experiment was this: is that when they put a second person in who gave the right answers, that number of wrong answers dropped precipitously. And the reason why I bring this up, and it connects to what I'm trying to do, is that we need to be on the ground in the environmental movement in big numbers, because they have groupthink, and it's extremely powerful. I'll give you another example. I saw in the news about 2 weeks ago in Naples, Florida, they had the news people looking in the supermarket. Practically nobody was wearing a mask. I mean, this was a big supermarket, and it was amazing. But the thing is, again, following it, totally irrational, but everybody's following what everybody else is doing. And it was, I guess that was a very right-wing area, and people are, you can't, wearing a mask is a bad thing, So, people are like, they follow the herd. So what I'm saying is this, is that if the environmental movement is left to its own devices, you've got a lot of young people coming in, all of this will be repeated. That supermarket will be repeated en masse. The prejudices against technology, against GMOs and nuclear power and all of that will persist unless and until we're there with an environmental message that is scientific.
Right. It's kind of like the environmental movement has kind of lost direction and lost like a concrete focus, and we have to reintroduce that back into the movement with very straightforward scientific policies.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not just tribalism. Sometimes it's actually just seeing the alternative and not really being aware that there's an alternative.
Yes.
Like somebody might be, completely unaware of how they've been lied to about nuclear, or how they've been lied to about the limitations of intermittent renewables or X, Y, and Z. And just having the exposure to information is enough for them to, update their beliefs, and they aren't really intimidated by the tribalistic belonging as much as other people are. So I think that there's also an informational importance here too.
Absolutely.
To kind of focus more on the technology part of things and the specific technologies people are skeptical of. One is nuclear power. And if folks read more about ecomodernism, nuclear power is very, very critical to having the whole thing work, in my opinion, the whole message of ecomodernism, because it gives us the energy we need to do the incredible things needed to save nature. That's what I think. But why do you think nuclear power is such a central part to the doctrine?
I don't understand what you say. I don't understand that question. What are you saying? Is central part to the solution? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I'm saying, why do you think nuclear power is so central to ecomodernism?
Oh, well, if you're going to have dense cities, you need dense power, to run those cities. I mean, basically, nuclear power is the cleanest, the safest, and the most reliable form of energy. It's exactly the opposite of what we've been told, and it's as simple as that. I mean, if you're an environmentalist, you should be supporting nuclear power very strongly, because, like the IPCC has said, that it's impossible, literally, to decarbonize the planet without nuclear. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So,
yes.
If listeners are wondering.
Yes. And I want to add something to this. I mean, I could just be a nuclear activist, and I'm not knocking it. And I think that there's a place for it, definitely. But here's the thing. Ecomodernism is a general defense of science in general. And the thing is that, to me, GMOs and medicine are just as important as nuclear power. But it's just that, a lot of the people in the nuclear community, I notice this in a lot of different people in politics, they kind of get into one track, and it's not good to be too much in one track. For example, I'll tell you why I think that GMOs are just as important. The Aedes aegypti mosquito, big disease vector.
Oh yeah.
It could be the carrier of the next plague. And I tell you, we dodged a bullet with Ebola, by the way. We're lucky that Obama was president. I don't want to be.
Multiple times.
Yes. But anything like that that's passed on with the mosquitoes, God, man, it's like the zombie apocalypse. It really is. That's like an 80% death rate. I mean, it's horrible. So the way to deal with it, the only really effective way to deal with it is the genetically modified mosquito, which is perfectly safe. I mean, the idea of the mosquito getting loose, they always have this thing about the mosquito getting loose, or this thing getting, these fantasies, these crazy fantasies that they present, in opposition to GMOs. It's really way flakier than the anti-nukers, I think. But and that's going, that's going some,
Yeah.
really. And like another example, the GMO salmon, they are trying to have fish farms where the possibility of a superbug, which is the real threat that mankind faces, is diminished because they don't have to use antibiotics or very little in the fish farming. And they're worried about the fish getting loose, and they're not even worried about the superbug getting loose. I mean, that's the real problem. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, and then of course you could go into the environmental area, especially climate change. I mean, the world is getting hotter. It's getting drier. We have new kinds of insect infestations brought on by climate change, and plants can't evolve. Over very short periods of time to that. The food that we eat will have to be genetically modified to deal with more heat stress, to deal with less water and things like that. So these are all things. I could go into space too. In the area of space, I mean, people always talk about what is it? Degrowth is necessary because of limited resources on the planet. Well, we live in an infinite universe, and all you got to do is catch some asteroids, and you got enough metal and everything. And I mean, there's so much that we could do in space. I don't think that the future of mankind, I mean, not within my generation or yours, or even our children or grandchildren, maybe, will be that deeply into space to the point where you could have manufacturing and going on and importing going on, just like what's going on between America and China. But it will happen, it will happen, and it'll be a necessity.
So you would say that nuclear power, along with the other technologies that is advanced by ecomodernism, that's a defense of science, and science is going to be ever more important to deal with the environmental problems that we will face because of the climate issue. So it's a defense of science when we need it the most.
Yes, in all areas, and not just nuclear. And I would add something about nuclear too. Ecomodernism is capable of defending nuclear power in a way that traditional pro-nuclear activism is not, because we defend nuclear medicine. We could talk about atomic rocketry. I mean, nuclear power is not just those nuclear power plants. Nuclear energy has many, many applications outside of producing energy.
Absolutely.
And we could talk about that. And the thing is this, ecomodernism is a vision. To talk about nuclear is very wonky. I mean, when we talk in our circles, I mean, I hang out with, pro-nuclear people, and we could talk for hours and hours about the new scale and the MSRs and the molten salt and the this and the that, and you all get excited about it. But within our circle, that's exciting. But when you talk to the public, it's very wonky, you know. But if you present it in the context of science, science is a very bold vision, as opposed to the fearful vision of environmentalism. It's something that people could grab onto. And if you want to make change, you need to have a real vision. You can't just be like wonky and just talk about why nuclear is good as opposed to why it's bad. This is the vision of what nuclear could do. Take us into space, vertical farming, which is not possible really without nuclear power.
Right.
I could go on and on.
For sure.
Yeah, and I would also say, there's the idea of growth as an alternative to the degrowther philosophy. They say that growth is bad for the planet, and it is true that we live in an infinite universe, but the resources we have on Earth, if they're efficiently used, that doesn't mean we have to degrowth. You can have dematerialization as a part of growth, meaning you make systems that use fewer resources to get a higher output of return. And
Yes.
Nuclear power is an excellent example of that. GMOs, you can grow more food on less land using less water. So it's not that, I think one of the biggest problems with degrowther mindsets is one, that they don't actually understand the real consequences of trying to enforce something like that. But two, they don't really see the potential in that we can have a better standard of living and elevate people out of poverty and elevate people to a higher standard of living and use fewer resources and use resources in more sustainable ways. And we actually have to embrace science and technology to do that. And I think that's one of the core values that really I appreciate with ecomodernism.
It's a rebuke of the degrowth mindset, because you hear over and over, like, you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. And I think they make a mistake, because we aren't talking about infinite growth of extraction and environmental degradation. We're talking about increased growth of economic standard of living. And that does not necessarily mean you're using more resources. Like you say, we can use this growth to be more efficient with our resources. It's a different type of growth. It's not unlimited material growth. It's well-being growth, really.
Oh,
Definitely.
Yeah. Yep.
And qualitative growth versus quantitative growth is
Yes.
what I usually bring up when statements like that are made.
Yeah, people are like, they're reading from a script. They're not really thinking this through at all.
Yeah.
They're not really thinking this through at all. And the thing is, if you actually question people and you actually, break it down for them, and, just ask rhetorical questions, they're going to come up flummoxed, their own selves eventually. The thing that I would add to this too is that when you do that over Facebook, over the internet, it's so impersonal that, like, the id gets loose. I mean, me and Phil were talking about that. If you want to really convince people, you have to do it on the ground. You have to build relationships of trust, to get people to believe that you're for real, that you are not a shill, that you're someone has the same goals and the same aspirations as they do, but you're just kind of analyzing things a bit better,
Yeah. Although I have been accused of being a shill in person multiple times, but
I'm a certified shill too.
But yeah, you bring up a valid point though, because there, back to the tribalism, and that there's this sort of problem with this extreme division and bitterly opposing party lines that definitely is very visible on platforms like Facebook. So just from an informational standpoint, would you say that like the philosophy of ecomodernism is a good way to circumvent this?
Well, yes, I think so. I think so. I think our biggest problem is that, we don't have enough people who take an active role, donate, even participate in general. People kind of leave it, everybody's kind of in their worlds. And, you know, just talking about it on Facebook is not enough.
Slacktivism is what they call it.
What is it called?
Slacktivism or hashtagtivism.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've gone to NRC hearings, spoken at protest events, went out, talked to people. I agree. It's, the internet is a great place to learn and, at least get information out. But there definitely is a value to having one-on-one interactions with people in the real world, and they can see you're a real person with the same goals and stuff. And yeah, I think when I sort of engage with people, like there seems to be this in the dominant mainstream political philosophy, there seems to be, like the traditional conservative, like climate change isn't a problem or it's not real, or, there's sort of a downplaying of the severity of climate change where, there's the problematic left where there's this anti-nuclear thing, but they admit climate change is a problem. And I sort of see this bizarre division where there's like one group that kind of denies the problem and one group that denies the solution. And I think that nuclear energy, is one way to circumvent that and sort of bridge the divide. And I see ecomodernism on the, as a broader philosophy that incorporates a lot of issues to have similar values on other issues as well.
Yeah, I feel ecomodernism can actually get, people on the left and the right to agree on certain things in principle. Because, like you've said, Gabe, ecomodernism is a vision that kind of transcends the political bickering.
Yes.
Well, moving on. Do you think you could tell us what got you personally so interested in ecomodernism and its movement?
Well, I could go back to what converted me was that movie. What was that movie? What was that? You know the movie. It's
Pandora's Promise?
Yes, Pandora's Promise. Slip my tongue. That's what got me. That's what got me. Opened me up to nuclear power. But I'll say, in terms of ecomodernism, it always intrigued me right from the time of the manifesto. Even though I really didn't have an understanding about nuclear power, but I did have I've always been an open-minded person, so I wanted to see if there's a better way. If somebody says I have a better way, my ears perk up. And what really got me very fired up to start the Ecomodernist Society was I'm in 350, South Florida. It's part of 350.org. And there was this letter of 600 organizations with all kinds of demands that they were making that were really pretty crazy.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yes, yes. And I said to I am on the board of 350. I spoke with the board and I tried to get them to kind of put some resistance to this thing. And I wasn't successful. And the thing is that, they don't want to make waves. They actually agreed with me, but they don't want to make waves. They get their funding from 350, blah, 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 and everything. And, they're nice people, but I don't, sometimes you got to take a stand.
Absolutely.
And this letter demanded a halt to nuclear energy, biomass energy. It said that any market-based mechanism was they were vigorously opposed, to the extent they said that if these kinds of things were in climate legislation, that they would actually oppose the climate legislation. And that is what
Yeah.
really got under my skin, because I spent decades fighting global warming. And we're going to finally get some kind of action on climate, and you're going to oppose it because it doesn't fit your little, I don't
Purity
know,
test.
purity test. Exactly.
Impossible purity test.
Impossible purity test. Oh, dams as well. Hydro.
Yeah, large hydro they opposed, and
You know, I
then they said
mean,
small hydro had to be, under like whatever bizarre regulations they had in mind.
And I've also
even if
heard
you,
people like,
yeah, go ahead.
I've
I'm
also
sorry.
like Bernie Sanders for being very concerned about climate change on his platform, like wrote how nuclear is a false solution. And part of me is like, where did you, how can you say that? Like, it mind boggles me.
Well, Bernie Sanders is an old hippie from Vermont. We're actually from Brooklyn by
True.
way of Vermont. And he just he kind of sticks to that trope, but that's a dangerous trope in terms of because you talk about the Energiewende in Germany, right? I mean, total disaster. I mean, they
Yeah.
lead not just Europe but the whole world in the price of electricity because of shutting down nuclear power. It's not as I mean, people will say, oh, the solar panels are so cheap, but I mean, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
It's a mess. They led the EU in deaths from colds. I think for many years. I think it's kind of a race between them and Poland. I think, but horrible. And they spent €500 billion. I mean, if we ever did that, I mean, that would be the end of the Democratic Party. I mean, Donald Trump or his heirs would be in control for God knows how long after a
Yeah.
debacle like that. There would be no kind of climate energy, solutions. And I will say this too: people realize the total waste of money this is, and they're afraid of voting for progressives, and they're afraid of even voting for Democrats because of that. You know,
Yeah.
and so they are. I don't know. It's self-defeating right from the start.
Though disclaimer, we try to stay politically neutral, but
Yeah.
we get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you can't leave politics totally out of this. I mean, I try to be not bipartisan. Whatever. I mean, we need to be bipartisan for this, though. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't want to get tribal about that with people.
And I say, hey, I'll, build a plant that can run itself, provide reliable electricity, and, get a return on that investment, and also fight climate change at the same time. That's why nuclear is so important to this. Bridge the divide and check all the boxes.
And
Yeah,
I can definitely see why personally you've learned about these technologies and you kind of see how the traditional environmental movement starts to reject science, and then you kind of start looking at ecomodernism and just like, dang, there's really something here,
yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, you're currently starting this new organization called the Ecomodernist Society of North America. Can you tell us more about it and the inspiration behind it?
Well, I kind of, yeah. I mean, the inspiration was like I said, um, it has to be done. It's just something that has to be done, and and nobody else is doing it. So I said, well, I got to step up then. That's it. So
Oh,
I formed it. We've already started. We've got it's not big right now, but we're trying to slowly get big. We're working on getting things together. We meet every Saturday. Um, it's at 2 o'clock Eastern time, 11 o'clock Pacific time, and 7 o'clock at Greenwich Mean Time. And
okay.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about business, but we're going to get away from that a bit because I'm going to start having our get-togethers earlier so we could take care of business and then kind of just talk with each other. But we're really trying to organize and get things together slowly but surely, and we
Yeah,
make a change here.
the Europeans have quite a few groups, and we're kind of lacking that here in North America. So it's good
Yeah, it's
to
nothing.
get that going.
So what would becoming a member entail? It's like if someone was interested in joining and getting involved, how would they go
Well,
about that?
right now, we have not yet set up any dues. We've decided that we just want to leave it wide open. So there's no official membership as of yet. The reason being that it's better to get some kind of momentum and popularity before uh, asking people for money, in terms
Right.
of that. So we're just kind of taking it slow, in that respect, you know.
Where do people find like links to meetings?
Yeah, our website, which is kind of it's there. We're still working on it, but it's still good enough to look at. It's ESNA.earth. Now, ESNA stands for Ecomodernist, E, Society, S, of N for North, and of course, America, A. ESNA, ESNA, Ecomodernist Society of North America. It's ESNA.earth is the website.
Earth. Okay.
If you want to contact me, Ecomodernist Society at esna.earth is that's our email.
You'll probably find that on the website too.
Yeah.
Well, we've talked a lot, and we have a lot more to talk about. This is kind of open conversation now.
Sure.
But yeah, I like what you brought up about how, it can be very difficult for one person to stand out against a whole crowd. And this is an interesting thing that you mentioned in those line experiments. If there's just one other person in the room, like going with, the true answer, then that sort of provides the comfort for that other one person to, also align with the right answer. And I think there was a pretty entertaining TED Talk about 10 years ago. I don't know if you saw this, but it was the dancing guy at a festival.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So
Yeah, I know. It was a
there's this
video.
video,
It
and
was, it
this
was, it was
one guy dancing, and he's having. So yeah, we were talking about the dancing man at the festival, and this was one guy, and he's dancing, having a blast, and nobody's really joining him. There's a bunch of people around him sitting and just enjoying the music, and he's dancing for a while, but then one other person joins him, and they once you have two people dancing, it seems to just exponentially increase how many people join, and another person joins, and another group of friends join, and before you know it, there's everybody in the frame is dancing and having a blast, and I think that's a pretty good symbol of how humans can be, where you might provide the alternative, and you might seem fringe or like an outlier to the mainstream ideology or narrative as far as policy goes, and as long as you provide that alternative and you communicate with people and you state your case and show the values of why it's important to support that alternative, then you can enable that exponential growth if everything's lined up. So I think it's really good that you're doing this.
Yeah, and I would say another cool thing is when I go to some like climate marches, to build a repertoire with people instead of just through the interwebs. You show up with a sign that says, "We need nuclear power," and then that gets a conversation started. And then it's that snowballing effect, kind of like you were talking about, Colby, where you have someone else that joins the conversation and just like, wait a second, I actually heard something good about nuclear power, and you can kind of get that new idea going. So
Absolutely. I've been I've been noticing it just in the last 5 years. Like 5 years ago, when I really started pushing for nuclear, it felt like, I was just alone in my social groups sort of talking about it. But over the last 5 years, there's just been an explosion and people outwardly speaking up for nuclear, supporting it, especially in, my generation and the younger generation, where we're really embracing it now. And it's not something that the traditional green movement can ignore anymore.
Good. Maybe it's like a youth rebellion against their elders.
I've definitely, yeah, I can definitely see that.
And that's why I think the ideas of ecomodernism, like as long as we get out there and talk about them, that's the only way forward, really.
Yeah, I tell you, one trope that I hate is there are no technological solutions. You guys have heard of that?
Oh,
Yeah.
constantly. Oh, it's all just as long as we draft the right policy, it'll magically get fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I like technology. We get into discussions sometimes on the internet groups about, is the electric car a good thing? And guys will say, oh, because of this data and that data, and then the other will say this data and that data to oppose that, and there's this back and forth. And there's something that gets lost in the sauce there. And this is true of technology in general, that there's an evolution taking place. When you speak of the electric car, it is something that's in progress. So it's like talking about if a baby is useful,
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. It's exactly what, and I'm just using an example of the electric car. Carbon capture and storage. You can name it. A
Golden
lot
rice
of
is a good example of this too.
all of that. I mean,
The people who were opposing golden rice, they kept quoting like the prototype, the first version, saying you need to eat 20 cups of it to get your vitamin A level for the day. And like that, they were still using that argument when, you get your vitamin A level from just like 1 cup of it. It was, yeah.
Yeah, So I think you have to always look at technology in the long view. I mean, there are exceptions to this. I mean, it's not a total thing. I mean,
Laws of physics.
fossil fuels needs to go.
Yeah.
That's really a thing, and AI too. I mean, the military use of AI scares me. So I mean, it's not a total thing about technology is all wonderful. I mean, we should be still be looking at it critically, but at the same time, as a whole, it's what is needed to save the planet.
Right. And what kind of bothers me is oftentimes the traditional environmental movement says there's no technological solution, but yet they'll say, oh, but we have one. It's called wind and solar. And it's like, don't you kind of see how you're not being consistent here? And I think that's very powerful,
right?
To point out the inconsistencies or the double standards. Because if people start hearing about the double standards, they start to be like, yeah, that's not really fair, is it?
Or they'll even take it a step further, like right on the nose, where they'll say, "Oh, well, that's just wind and solar right now. Solar panels are only going to get more efficient." But they're saying that in response to the problem with intermittency, and like intermittency can't be solved with an increase in conversion efficiency.
But of course, we'll never solve the waste. We'll never solve the waste problem. That'll never happen. But we're gonna get solar. That's yeah.
Yeah, we can recycle solar panels, but you can't recycle spent fuel. No, that's
it's an unsolvable problem. Yeah.
And also get into it with the first of a kind versus nth of a kind. They want to judge nuclear shortcomings by like ancient reactor technology and from another industry entirely. They don't want to address anything with the new reactors or the potential for future reactors even.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and just nuclear and technologies just offer so much hope to the problems, and it does smell of anti-science rhetoric to be like, oh, let's just totally disregard technology. So
I don't know what to say. The arguments are so ridiculous. It's just mind-boggling, you know?
Yeah, we do have to stand up for science and, stand up for technology as a responsible use. Because, no matter what the policy is written, you're not going to, eradicate polio without a polio vaccine like that.
Yeah.
I'll try to, cite some historical examples of why that argument just completely doesn't work.
And you know something too, there's a psychology that keeps these kind of things going. And it is groupthink. And going back to groupthink, here's the thing, especially when you're in a movement, political movement, we want harmony within the group. We don't want, because that makes us stronger in terms of getting our goals achieved. That's true, by the way.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, we don't talk about certain things. And the exact things that we don't talk about are the things that need to be talked about the most, because they are controversial. And the reason they are controversial quite often is because there's really something that needs to break through or out into the open and break down prejudices. And you can't really make real progress unless you break through those prejudices.
You can't have progress if you can't see past a stigma and really talk about it so you can actually solve things.
Yeah, you got to put it on the table.
You got to.
It's funny. It's kind of like the Thanksgiving dinner assumed rules. Like, don't bring up the stuff that'll start an argument. Like, don't bring politics into Thanksgiving dinner. But when you're actually in political groups, they're sort of following the same rules, and that's just very self-defeating, because you got to be able to be bold and address contradicting information, put it on the table, test the claims, challenge the claims, and see how to move forward. Well, thank you for joining us. It's been a great talk, and we hope to have you on again sometime.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
For sure. All right. Well, we'll talk to you later. I really like talking to Gabe. He's always so enthusiastic and has such a good demeanor. He brings so much to the conversation. I could not imagine a better person to advocate for ecomodernism.
Yeah, it's great to see a well-informed environmental activist willing to interact with the traditional environmental movement that needs to be better informed about the science and technology. So what was your takeaway from the conversation?
What I found most valuable about our conversation is the futurist vision Gabe has when it comes to the environment. I believe it's a fairly wrong-headed idea to see humans as working in harmony with nature, as if we're going to give up a great standard of living in industrialized civilization in order to live a more sustainable life, simply subsisting. Gabe mentioned how oftentimes people in the environmentalist movement are somewhat hostile towards technology. That is a shame, since technology is advancing the conditions of mankind, and it would be bad for the poorest among us if we rejected it. Gabe has the courage to stand up for technology and modernity. What are your thoughts, Colby?
Well, I'm glad we covered the importance of providing an alternative to the dominant narrative in environmentalism. There's so much psychological rigidity that can entrap people into thinking about an issue from only one perspective and not permitting an honest questioning of that narrative. Ecomodernism is able to reframe the concept of environmentalism, to be welcoming towards science, technology, and economic prosperity for all. It would be nice to see ecomodernism grow as a movement to become the dominant philosophy of protecting the environment and people.
Absolutely. We need more people to spread the word about the philosophy of ecomodernism. I urge listeners who are interested to read the Ecomodernist Manifesto and to reach out to Gabe to become a member of the Ecomodernist Society of North America. It's just what the planet needs right now and could refresh environmentalism.
Sure. Well, this episode was quite fun, and we want to thank Gabriel Ignetti for talking to us. This has been Ecomodernism. Join the movement. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you heard and want more content, you can support Americans for Nuclear Energy's Climate Fix podcast on a per-episode basis with Patreon, link in the description. To support Americans for Nuclear Energy and our general mission, visit our website at www.americansfornuclearenergy.org. All words. Again, that's www.americansfornuclearenergy.org. We have a link to donate with PayPal under the Mobilize page. You can also purchase some Americans for Nuclear Energy swag under our store page. This will really help us pay for the little things, especially online service fees, to keep our organization running. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, and YouTube. Lastly, we really want your feedback. Let us know your thoughts, questions, and concerns. We have a message form on our website under the About section, or you can email us directly at main@americansfornuclearenergy.org. All words. Again, that's main@americansfornuclearenergy.org. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Americans for Nuclear Energy's Climate Fix podcast. We'll see you next time.
Edited and produced by Jonna Adams.